You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. As always, we try to help you who might be in a role of leadership or authority at your business, whether you own the business or are working in a larger corporate type setting. We want to find common sense ways to help you navigate the day and achieve the things you want to achieve. My guest today is a gentleman who has studied decision making in a very big way. I'm going to let him describe that in more detail. But without further ado, I want to introduce Bruce Whitfield. Bruce, welcome to the show, man.
Doug, thank you so much. And I love the fact that you bring common sense into your show's descriptor. My grandfather was not particularly brilliantly educated. He went to school up until the age of 16. And as a result of, early 20th century wars and having to farm the land that he inherited from his father at a very young age. And he would say, "My boy, there is nothing common about common sense." It was one of his many, many wisdoms. And the more I get to know people, the more I realize there is nothing common about common sense. And there is so much to learn about ourselves and each other in, a very challenging and exciting and interesting world.
Well, that's exactly the stance I took in my first book, which is over my shoulder here. The title is The Uncommon Commodity, Common Sense Guide for New Managers. And it's a way to, and this is a good segue for our show here, because we're going to talk about some of the chaos in the world today, business world and otherwise, and ways that leaders can better navigate that chaos. But before we get into that, Bruce, I'm going to ask you, you did some studying, you did some interviews and some reviews with successful CEOs and leaders. How many interviews did you do to compile your database?
Well, okay. I mean, I'll give you the short version. I hosted a radio show for more than 20 years, and 2 hours a day, 220 days a year, and 10 interviews a day. Do the sums and you'll get to 50,000 interviews. Many of those were every 6 months with the reporting cycle, many with economists and policymakers, but generally I did 50,000 interviews. And in all of those interviews, there was a race against the clock. It was getting, an opening question, a middle question, and concluding it, and always trying to get the upper hand over a CEO, as, people in media do. Your job is to be provocative. And in that time, did about 50,000 interviews. A couple of those interviews, though, stood out. And a number of those interviews, and as I finished on the radio and decided to go out and carve my own path and create the Art of Deciding podcast and properties associated with that, I thought, what have I been doing for 20 years? What did it mean? What did I do? What did it mean? And trying to distill an essence of what I loved about what I did, and I absolutely adored each and every single moment of it, but that relentless treadmill did mean that I wasn't thinking as deeply as I wanted to think, and I wasn't challenging myself as deeply as I wanted to do, because you were constantly chasing the next story. And I sent a WhatsApp to about 100 people in my phone, people I'd antagonized, people I'd fought with, people I liked, people I'd worked with, people who'd reported to me over time. And I said, what do I do? What does it mean? Now, 2 people came back immediately and said, "Are you all right?" Because they thought I was standing on the edge of a tall building. And the vast majority came back and told me what I told them, which was I'd like to explain a complicated world in plain language and help other people understand it, which is essentially what I've been doing all that time. A number of people came back and helped me define what it was that I did, and that was getting really interesting and capable and brilliant people who have built businesses in some of the more hostile business environments in the world and have managed to navigate chaos and uncertainty, have managed to create multinational operations from the southern tip of Africa, where my focus was at the time, and have taken these businesses and these brilliant ideas global. And I started distilling that, and I've also got books over my shoulder. And I wrote a book called The Upside of Down, which is where opportunity exists when there is chaos and uncertainty for those who are brave enough to take it. I wrote a second one called Genius: How to Take Smart Ideas Global, and a third one, and more recently, towards the middle of last year, which is called The One Thing, and that is, can you solve problems by breaking them down into minuscule blocks and getting a butterfly effect going. But it came clear to me that the very finest leaders that I had interrogated and studied and really got close to over many years had a couple of characteristics in common. And the most common characteristic was an ability to, no matter what is happening around them, no matter what the challenges of the macro environment, their ability to block out the irrelevant, block out the noise, and focus in only on what matters for them to grow their enterprises, to make them sustainable, to create the jobs and the opportunities, and bring value to shareholders. The most powerful thing is knowing what to ignore. And that superpower is rare, but it is common in some of the most remarkable entrepreneurs I've ever had the good fortune to spend time with and to learn from.
That is a fascinating conclusion, knowing what to ignore.
And you look at the world today. Oh, my goodness gracious me. We are so overwhelmed. We've got these lovely devices. Thank you, Mr. Jobs. Genius man he was. And it's democratized information. It has put more information into more people's hands more of the time than at any other point in human history. Yet we've never had less clarity, less certainty, less view of the future than we do. I would argue simply because we're overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that is pushed towards us. And because I think we suffer from a collective FOMO, the fear of missing out, we don't want to miss anything, so we spend far too much time in the minutiae of things that are actually, in the fullness of time, irrelevant. And the superpower that we need to cultivate is that ability to zoom in on what really matters and zone out the rest.
Well, and in that bath of information, we are faced with the ever increasing complexity of false information being put in the pile. And I, for instance, I confess, I do spend some casual time scrolling Instagram, and there are those that have created a series of amazing memes taking my sports figure heroes that I follow, and they'll take the press conference, but they'll dub over the dialogue. And at first blush, you say, did he say that? Really? Is that what he really said? And you realize, no, it's all fake. It's AI generated. It's dub over. It's entertaining and funny as all get out, but you have to give credence to the individual speaking and go, no, they would never say anything like that. That's not what they said. But there are plenty who go, did you hear what so-and-so said about such and such? And it's like, no, he didn't say that.
I have lots of fun doing presentations and standing in front of audiences and delivering themes and ideas and conclusions to people. But one of my favorite slides ever, and it's got to be used carefully, a friend of mine was sitting in the front row of a presentation I was doing, and I have a slide with the word gullible on it. And I told the story of how in the woke world in which we live, the word gullible and its Oxford English Dictionary explanation of a person who is easily misled, that the Oxford English Dictionary had actually been convinced to change the descriptor of the word because it was offensive. It made you responsible. Somebody else has deceived you and you are at fault? That can't be true. So they've changed the meaning of the word gullible to a person misled by deceit. And I could see my friend going, oh, outrageous. And it suddenly dawned upon them that I was playing a little game. And we are increasingly gullible. And we're increasingly gullible. And it comes from that information overwhelm. It comes also from the fact that things that are deemed to be credible, and this is complicated stuff, but it goes down to, how we were brought up, our belief systems, our understanding of the world. We like to have an understanding of the world, and we like to make things fit into our understanding of the world, and that validates us, and it simplifies things. People are either right or they're wrong based on our own beliefs and our biases, and that enables those who, I don't know, whatever motivation they have, to mislead, to create content that is entirely plausible, depending on your politics, depending on your religion, depending on where you stand in the world and what your belief is in migration or pineapple on pizza, whatever it might be. We are easily beguiled, and we have to be very aware of it, because there are there are very, very strong forces in the world, for not wanting to be a conspiracy theorist on this, but very strong forces in the world that want us to think in a certain way, behave in a certain way, buy products in a certain way, vote in a certain way. And it's a challenging time to be a human.
Well, and I want to go back to your observation on the leaders who made great decisions and created great things. One element in the idea of ignoring what was your word? They ignored the
noise, the chaos,
the
noise,
uncertainty, the non-essential. But closely related to that, what did you find about the notion of confirmation bias as they were asking for information to inform their decisions?
None of us is immune to this. And one of my favorite examples of this is Steve Jobs stands up and launches the iPhone in 2007, roughly the same time as Forbes magazine has a cover on it with the CEO of Nokia at the time, or Nokia as you might call it. And the cover words are 2 billion cell phones. Can anyone, or 2 billion phones, can anyone catch the cell phone king? And that was the wrong question, which Forbes was asking, because Jobs had just launched the iPhone, which was not a phone. It was a brand new idea. It was a communication device. And at that time, of course, what was the dominant corporate device, the device that everybody wanted? It used our opposable thumbs. It was the BlackBerry. And the owners, the bosses at BlackBerry looked at the iPhone, and as Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates and others did as well, go, it's got no keyboard. That's not a business device. It's a toy. It doesn't matter. And confirmation bias came into the world of BlackBerry, because for the 2 years following the launch of iPhone, BlackBerry grew. Its market share grew. It was unassailable. At least that's what they believed. And then, of course, there was the big BlackBerry blowout, and they went dark for a week, and it all changed really quickly. And they had this confirmation bias. They believed they were superior. They continued to grow despite this apparent new threat that clearly was not going to be effective. And when disaster struck, they were completely inadequately prepared to deal with it. And their technology turned out was not as good as they believed it was, wasn't as useful and as user friendly as the devices that emerged after 2007. So that confirmation bias is something to which we're all vulnerable. The smartest people in the world are vulnerable to it, and we have to be consistently vigilant that we seek out information that does not confirm our biases. And that's what I absolutely love in interviewing really brilliant people on the Art of Deciding podcast. Most notably, and probably the best example of this, is a man called Sir Brad Freed. Now, Brad Freed he worked at he did his MBA cum laude at Wharton, and he became a top-level consultant at McKinsey. He was going to join Goldman Sachs, but instead was enticed to go to London to run the banking operations there of Investec, and at the age of 33 or 34 became chief executive of Investec. And I was asking him about decision-making and how he reaches decisions and how he ensures that he doesn't impose his will and desire on powerful teams of really smart and capable people. He pays a lot of money to these people, and he pays them because they are capable, and he should be tapping their brains. And he says, I don't speak. I don't speak. I don't allow my view to be imposed on the group. If we're looking to make a really complex decision, we'll state the problem and then I'll be quiet. And we'll go all the way around the table. And by the time we come to a conclusion, often I would not have spoken. I would not have given an opinion. I would not have led the discussion. I would have occasionally have asked a question or directed a question or whatever the case might be, but I would never have let anybody know what it is that my view is. And he'll then test the outcome of the meeting on the person at the table he believes to have the least agency or the least power at the table. And if they get the outcome of the meeting, then off they go and they go and impose it. Or they go and develop the idea that they've come up with or the solution they've come up with. And somebody once came up to Brad at the Bank of England, where he was the chairman of the Bank of England, and said to him, "But Brad, what do you think?" And he said, "Nobody cares what I think." He said, "But you're the chairman of the Bank of England." He said, "Nobody cares what I think." He says, "But I care what you think." He says, "No, you don't. We've come to a far better conclusion than I would have come to on my own. And therefore, that is the only conclusion that matters. What I say may distract, may dissuade." So he gets over his own biases by opening it up to the very best intellectual capital to whom he has access and allows it to flow. And if it goes awry or people start misbehaving, he'll shepherd. Your job is to chair, not to dictate. And it's one way I think we can overcome that level of bias. It's courageous, time-consuming, but I do believe you get better outcomes using that sort of strategy.
Well, when you think about it, it's brilliant. And the majority of case history that I know on business decisions that were made that did not go well, cost businesses large sums of money, were inevitably one of the common denominators that I can think of. And this is very unscientific, but just a little bit on the fly now that we're talking about it, I think was the owner, founder, chairman ego that got in the way, where they said, exactly. No, none of this makes any sense. This is what we're doing. And, to the gentleman you're speaking of, what also flashed through my mind was he sure sounds like someone that would be scored on the very high end of the emotional intelligence scale as we now know it, because there was a zero ego factor for him. He was encouraging and setting up an environment for collaboration and input from the smartest minds he thought he could recruit to the table, and genuinely yielded to their input to come up with the decision that needed to be made.
Again, one of the several of the standout interviews had another thing in common, and I would talk to successful people and say, "What is it that makes you so successful?" And I recall a good friend of mine who was another chief executive of a bank at the time, and he said, "Always hire people smarter than yourself." And I went, "Oh, you've just read that in a book. Where did you get that's too good. That is too good to be true. Where on earth do you pluck that from?" He goes, "No, I live it." And he took me through a list of his executive committee. This person is brilliant at that. That person brilliant. So I said, "Well, what is the purpose of you then?" I said, "Because I'm the conductor, and all I do is ensure that the orchestra plays in tune, and they hit the right notes at the right time. They keep the tempo going, and we get to the conclusion with a beautiful finale. That is my job. I don't have to be good at everything. What I do have to be good at is making sure that I steer the ship in the right direction and avoid the icebergs and the storms and everything else." And another thing he said, actually, which was also quite philosophical for a chief executive and something that a lot of leaders could do well to remember, he said, "When things go well, you give credit where it's due. You praise publicly and loudly and throw money at those who come up with the best solutions. And when things go wrong, you take full responsibility publicly and you apologize and you take it because you were the conductor of that orchestra. It was your fault. Others may have dropped the ball, but you weren't guiding them properly. You've got to take the blame." And successful teams and loyal teams and creative teams and teams that aren't afraid to make mistakes and to try new things and to be creative have some sort of air cover, if you like, that in most organizations I don't think provide.
Yeah, I think that is interesting that you bring that up. And as you were describing that, I'm thinking of an organization I was actually part of in my early career. It was a banking organization who was chaired by a gentleman who became a legend in the regional banking world here in Texas. His name was Ben Love. And number one, Ben was a towering man. I think he was 6'7" on the scale, something like
Proper
that.
Texan.
So,
Yes, proper
so it was when he walked in the room, heads turned just naturally. But when he opened his mouth, people sat down and got quiet. But Ben, it was a conundrum and a paradox in his own right. He was very autocratic in some degrees. To give you a brief idea of what I'm talking about, I actually used his example in a business class I was teaching at a university one time. We were talking about organizational design, organizational behavior. And I drew this org chart. Here's one box at the top, and I drew this long line, and I did 71 boxes. I asked the class, I said, does this org chart work? And they go, oh, no. There's no way this is going to work, and blah, blah, blah. Everybody was quoting from their textbooks about span of control and all of that. And I said, well, guess what? This org chart is a living, breathing organism, still exists to this day. And the gentleman up here has guided a performance record of 64 consecutive quarters of earnings growth. 16 years through all manner of economic bust and boom. And yet, it ran. And we got to talking about how does that really work? And he was, on one hand, he was very autocratic in how he dealt with his directs, but he pulled it off. He made it work, and he had a board.
What was it about him, though? I mean, because it astounds me. And there are so many different types of leaders that people would follow into war. And clearly he was one of those. And, he seems unreasonable to some degree. And I'm working through this idea of unreasonableness as a critical factor in leadership. Reasonable people are nice. Reasonable people want to be liked. Unreasonable people, perhaps like Mr. Ben Love and many others, some are autocratically unreasonable. Some are just uncompromising in their ethics. Some are uncompromising in the standards they set for themselves and for others. And I think there's a broad scale of unreasonableness. But I do think that nothing real or nothing valuable is being created by a reasonable person ever. We'd like to think we're reasonable. I wonder if you've got to be unreasonable on a spectrum.
I think there is. I think there are a couple of factors, and I stayed with that organization 20 years and watched his leadership and actually learned much from the leadership laboratory we had there. And I think there are a couple of things, and from my vantage point, the first and foremost about Ben was clarity. Where are we going and how are we going to get there?
Yeah.
A clear message that was unwavering when it would. Now it changed year over year depending on what markets were doing and technologies and things that were impacting the business world, both legal and market wise. But when we did the work to set our annual plan and our budget, that became stone. That it was unwavering. There was no loosey-goosey, 3 months into the year, oh, we need another $1 million here. You didn't put it in the budget. You don't get it. It's not happening. And there was a rigor about that. Yeah. And there were many who could not suffer that environment. They would not take a leadership role in that environment, or if they did, they didn't last long. Because they wanted to be a little more entrepreneurial, a little more freewheeling, a little more loose with decision making. But Ben mandated a rigor about how we ran things. Now, people say, well, didn't that stifle creativity and innovation? No, we had protocols, we had methodologies for floating new ideas.
Yeah.
But inevitably, Ben was a master of the long game. And
And yeah, that's the secret, though, isn't it? It is that ability to not worry about the quarterly. Yeah, the quarterly results matter, of course they do, but the quarterly results are a journey to a never-ending point. And the job of the leader is to provide clarity. I mean, you look at Bezos and you look at Amazon and you look at some of those old interviews where people are going, Letterman and others, you've been going for 20 years and you've not made a profit and your stock price is this, and your valuation is at that level, and your multiple, what? Please explain, because nobody could understand what he was building. And Bezos, as it turns out, was right. And it is the courage to have the long-term view, which is, I think, in short supply nowadays, because people are judged and their stock options depend on those quarterly performance and hitting the targets time by time. And that ultimately is, I think, costly because you don't have long-term strategic vision and delivery. And it's far choppier. But yeah, good on Mr. Ben Love.
A very near to home example of Ben's leadership was that this was many decades ago in the banking world when the ATM machine was just coming on the scene. And we had a fierce competition with a bank literally just down the street from us, headquartered in downtown Houston. And that bank tended to be more retail consumer oriented. We were more of a business bank, but nonetheless, we fought for ranking and positioning. And they, as a retail bank, came out long and strong on the ATM placement. And so our analysis team, I said we had a protocol for innovation and thinking. They did the work on putting together a proposal about how to enter the ATM world, did the big pitch, and I was in the room. I had the benefit of being in a role where it was appropriate for me to be in the room when this was going on. They made the big pitch to Ben about going headlong into the ATM world, and it was a good pitch, and a lot of people believed it was the right thing to do, even if nothing but a defensive play for us. Mm-hmm. But Ben looked at it, and he kind of tapped on the table a minute, and he goes, nope, not going to do it. He said, we are going to defer this a minimum of 2 years. And we'll let the others take the slings and arrows and learn the mistakes. And we then will have better information. And it's my belief we're not going to lose much in the process. Well, you go through that course of 2 years, sure enough, all the early pioneers had flaming train wrecks of experience making this work. And what was revealed was the real driver in the market was the convenience of getting to that machine. And guess what? If you needed cash, you probably weren't at a bank branch in that bank brand. You were probably out on the road somewhere on a holiday going to another town where that bank didn't even exist, but you needed cash. And so your card was worthless. Well, so what was discovered is there needed to be a backbone to that network. There needed to be a switch that allowed all machines of all kinds, didn't matter what color the flag was on the machine, it needed to talk to the network that could pass a transaction back to the home bank. Well, our pitch now became, let's build the switch.
But that's so powerful and so interesting. And again, I think Brad Fried and Ben Love would have gone on very well because, sometimes the best decision is to do nothing. Sometimes the best decision is to step back. And as Brad Fried puts it, to let somebody else blow their hand off. It's a bit graphic, but let somebody else blow their hand off and let them make the mistakes. It's okay to be a fast follower. Rather than be the originator of an idea. And I wonder where you stand, Doug, on artificial intelligence and the race for AI and this madness around AI and the hype cycle of AI, which is exciting and vibrant and so many things are possible. They're just not possible yet. And the stocks that are underpinning these things are priced for perfection. And just in the week that we're speaking, the Chinese have come out with an option, and you've got OpenAI accusing them of stealing IP, and it's a mess. And companies are applying bot technologies to answer human questions, and they do it badly. And our experience of the companies with which we deal is deteriorating rapidly because we're being pushed further and further away from humans and more towards machines that are not yet able to do the job. And we're in this mad hype cycle. And the approach of allowing others to be first and then picking up later, or providing the real technologies, the picks and shovels that make it possible for these things to talk to each other one day, maybe that's the solution. So again, are there books written on Ben Love? I need to learn more about this guy.
There are. I can share a title with you offline here. But to your question on the AI, I do find it very interesting, and I still have enough curiosity and excitement in my tank, despite my years. I'm a constant learner. I have explored implementing some AI elements in some of the work that I'm doing, but in my coaching community, where I meet regularly with amazing executive coach people from all over the globe, I think there is an ongoing, ever-present debate and concern about how people may migrate to getting their coaching questions answered by AI. Now, you can definitely use AI to ask some questions. And let me give you an interesting case study. I'm dealing with a small independent business CEO right now who has announced he has found a way clear to eliminate all the middle management in his company by using AI robots. And I said, so how's that going to look? And he said, well, it'll be me, and I will have my frontline people doing the direct, customer interface support work that we're doing today. And I went, I thought about that. I didn't judge. I didn't get into a debate, but I did two things. Over the New Year's holiday, I had a chance to take my family on a cruise. So I had all of my adult children assembled, and we were at dinner one night, and I shared this. I said, how would you feel? And we're talking Gen X and Gen Zs, around the table with me. And I said, how would you feel about a company where the CEO said, I'm eliminating all middle management? And, how would that affect you? And they said, I would quit on the spot.
Exactly.
And I said, why? And they said, well, in our experience, it was the middle managers that were our mentors and helped us grow. And I can't imagine a world where I wouldn't have access to that. And I'm not going to talk to a computer screen for those questions I may want to ask. That was number one. And number two, I thought this was an interesting opportunity. I asked AI what they thought about AI running middle management. And it came back with quite a contrarian reply. It said, you're going to eliminate the mentoring. It did identify that. It argued that you're going to eliminate innovation because AI can do many things. But according to the AI platform I was using, it admitted I can't innovate.
It can't innovate. It can only tell you what has come before. And that's, again, Elon Musk will tell you that the machines will learn to learn and will be better at doing it than us. And maybe they will one day. They also don't necessarily, I don't know if they'll ever have any ethical parameters or understand the complexity of ethics. And in a conversation with Lee Child, I'm sure you're familiar with Lee Child, the creator of Jack Reacher. He sold $1 billion worth of books in his time. And of course, the Reacher series is big on Amazon. But I said to him, why can I not just get an AI to create the next Jack Reacher? And he says, yeah, you could do that. You could say, write create a hero in the guise of Jack Reacher in the style of Lee Child and give me an original story. And the AI couldn't give you an original story because it may be able to trawl the internet, and these things are behind firewalls and stuff, but it can gather enough information to tell you broadly who Jack Reacher is. He's very big. He's got hands the size of dinner plates, all of those characteristics. He's a loner. Yeah, we can create that story. But it will never come up with anything new, or in his view, not yet come up with anything new, because it can only tell you what has been, not will be. And that's where human innovation, human creativity, the very things that have created the wonders that exist within AI are all human innovations. They're all human inventions. 5 years from now, I have no idea what it looks like. But there are certain things that I think will be very hard to replicate. They'll do some things better, yeah, absolutely. But humanity, we still depend on each other. I mean, the very sense of humanity is a sense of community. We are drawn to people who, think like us, who challenge us, people we like, people we don't like. And, that's the nature of humanity. Once that's overtaken and, Arnold Schwarzenegger does come back, it's going to be
along that line, if I may, I think about the dynamic of the infamous Maslow's hierarchy of need. As humans, we have these rungs of need, and starting with, basic survival, am I going to be safe, warm, and fed? But then as you go up that rung, depending on the translation that you're reading, somewhere in the middle is that sense of community. I need to belong, and I need to feel loved by somebody in that circle. And when you start talking about automating business to get rid of that internally at the company, I think that rung is unfulfilled, and therefore people are going to go elsewhere.
When I was doing my MBA, and I was talking to a classmate, and she was talking to me about her AI friend. And she'd been through a divorce, and she'd had a tough time, and the kids had gone through a rough time. And so she'd, desperate, looking for, 2 o'clock in the morning. Even your very best friend is eventually going to get bored of the calls. And she developed a relationship, I don't know, a dependency, a connection. And it had gone so far as the AI giving her a nickname. And I said, so what's your AI nickname? And she wouldn't tell me. It was so deeply personal to her. And she was a very reasonable, sane, normal person who'd had a really tough time. And this became a bridge for her just to get some balance back. But there are people in the world who are going to become reliant and dependent, particularly in big cities and in places where you don't have the human connection that we dream about and aspire to. And there are lots of sci-fi movies about this already, and sci-fi often leads reality where, tragically, I think people are going to become increasingly dependent on something that doesn't judge. It doesn't, it's creepy. But
It is.
you need people in your life to say, you've been an ass, I think is your term, isn't it? You've not been a good person. You can try harder, and you don't need your bad habits affirmed. You don't need don't need to be keep being told you're wonderful, because that's the way the machine is programmed.
To your point, I'm thinking of a young man I had on my show a while back, and we were talking about mental health and recovery, and he was a self-professed. In his teen years, he went through a lot of struggle with bullying and the whole social media, events and the ramification. But it was real interesting to me. He was in his late 20s as we were speaking, and he basically said, I've come full circle in terms of, I now realize I need that direct human feedback, and I need to be told if I'm screwing up. And I actually value that more than being patted on the back and given the participation trophy for showing up. He said that created such a sense of guilt and frustration about my own identity. I didn't know if I was good at soccer. I just got a trophy for it, and he said it was a horrible way to live, and he's come through an apparent amazing recovery and is now well on the way to much better mental health. But he said it was that realization that I do need that challenge, I do need that push to help shape and guide me going forward.
it goes back to that concept of unreasonableness. I mean, we all need unreasonable people in our lives. We need people who hold us to a higher standard. We need people who push us. And sometimes they need to upset us. Sometimes they need to push us so hard and so far that we don't talk to them for a bit because they're being bloomin' unreasonable, and how dare they suggest, we go and climb Mount Everest or whatever they're encouraging us and challenging us to do. And yeah, I just love this idea of unreasonableness, because those nearest and dearest and who care most about us are the ones who are going to be the most unreasonable in their expectations of us.
I like that.
And if you don't have unreasonable people in your life, you need to go and you need to grow your circle, because if you're constantly being affirmed, then that's where those biases come in. That's where the echo chambers come in. That's where you start feeling like a genius. And then when the world falls apart around you, you can never work out why. And it's about having big circles of friends. And I've been toying with this idea for a while. And as somebody who has been deliberately provocative, or just annoying, possibly more than provocative, but in media, where, you're presented with a brilliant idea and you've got an entrepreneur who's come up with this fantastic solution to a problem. And then your job is to be devil's advocate or something. And you go, oh, I see that you've, found a mechanism to bring world peace. Yeah, I see what you're saying, but, and you throw in the but, and you create the conflict because, hey, that's entertainment and that's media and that's radio and it's great conversation and it's back and forth. And ultimately, you don't get the very best result, because what you force the other person to do is get into a defensive mode, because now they've got to justify why they feel this way. And
Right.
What I'm trying more and more to do, and it is so hard to do, is when somebody comes up with an idea, no idea in its earliest iteration is ever going to be fully formed. It needs to be grown and embellished and tested. But a far more effective way of testing an idea, instead of going, yeah, but what about the market? What about the economy? What about the politics? What about the trade wars? What about, but. Go, yeah. And how is that going to work? And who are you going to get to help you? And by simply changing a conjunction from but to and, it becomes an additive conversation rather than a conflict or a barrier to progress. And I think that many of the most unreasonable people in the world in this context I'm talking about are yes and people, because they are forcing you to dig deeper. You've got an idea, and until you run out of ands and your brain explodes. But the but shuts down, the and opens up. And I find that in changing the way you think about some of the huge complex issues with which we must contend today, I think it's a very valuable. I'm finding it valuable, and I'm hoping to be able to convince others of the same
I
idea.
agree totally. It's interesting you bring that up. I actually have that in my repertoire of my executive coaching. I'll listen to my clients describe some of their interactions with their teams and people and even stakeholders and customers. When I hear that propensity to be the butt guy, I say, get off your butt. And we talk about the and connector there. You hear the idea, instead of saying, but here's my idea that's so much better, you can say, and have you considered ...
Yeah.
And then you're right,
powerful.
that opens up, it continues the dialogue. It allows that growth and additional thinking that might be necessary to come to that better outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's something there. Soichiro Honda. Now, he is the guy who started Honda. Fantastic engines. Not the world's most exciting vehicle design ever, but very reliable engines, reliable cars, motorbikes, outboard motors, those things. 1948, out of the ashes of Japan, and World War II, Soichiro Honda comes up, and he is very much an and person. And people would say, well, you want efficiency. Yes, I want efficiency. So they would design efficient engines. but they'd be ugly. They'd be impractical. They wouldn't work. They wouldn't deliver the sort of use case that he had in mind. And it became very clear that he'd say, well, yeah, we must be efficient, but the engine must perform. But we can't be efficient and perform. So, well, figure it out. So you get efficiency and performance. You can have both things. You don't have to have binary outcomes when you're making decisions either. And there are times where it's not a 50-50. It's not an either or. It's an and. And that becomes a far more powerful, meaningful, possibly even more sustainable pursuit of a good outcome than simply adversarial interactions all the time.
Similarly to that, I think in the same parallel is the notion of when you're hearing input and you feel that sort of conflict coming from it, try to take the position of it's not right or wrong, it's just different.
It's just not ready yet.
Don't pursue the debate of that's wrong or this way is the right way. No, it's just different. It was a new idea that was introduced. When you're processing the ands, you might, eventually put it aside. Like you said, it's not quite right. It's for the moment and not now like Ben Love did with the ATMs. But yeah, having that ability as a leader to kind of think in that different realm of possibility, that's just fascinating to me, really is.
I agree. And people who are collaborative, are willing to take feedback, who are willing to learn from others, are, I think, invariably more often than not going to be more successful than those who are belligerently antagonistic towards taking advice or guidance.
Right. Agreed. Well, Bruce, we're about up on time today. This has been amazing, and thank you so much for sitting in. I'll tell the audience, Bruce and I had quite a challenge getting together through a whole series of personal moments and challenges. It's taken us a bit to finally get here. But as I've come to know doing my show, and I don't know, you had this experience on your show, when you had a guest, you ran into difficulty scheduling. Inevitably, it was a really good show when you finally got to do it. So I feel that way about this one. So thank you for sitting in and sharing with us.
Doug, thank you for being patient and getting me back, because I've really enjoyed our interaction. And I've learned about Mr. Ben Love. I'm going to go and learn more about Ben Love.
Well, tell folks the best way to get hold of you, Bruce, if they're interested in knowing more about your work.
BruceWhitfield.com, The Art of Deciding podcast, and a book, fingers crossed, on possibly the world's most innovative fintech, coming out in the third, but probably the fourth quarter of 2025. So yeah, a couple of interesting things in the pipeline, and it's as continuous, as you say, learning and just being delighted about waking up in the morning and going, who are we going to see today? It's just, right. It's fantastic. Yeah.
I love it. Well, again, thank you, Bruce, so much. And folks,
thank you, Doug.
This is the point of the show. I want to remind you, we do have a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name. And this one's going to be a good watch. Bruce is an animated guy. If you hadn't heard it in his voice, check out the video. I think you'll enjoy it. It's been fun doing it. And I also want to remind you that if you need any help from me or my team, go over to my website at dougthorpe, THORPE.com. You can check out our resources and opportunities to work together, and would look forward to hearing from you. But for now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.